Whoa. Why is that tiny? Wait, is Zeta ball working? Yeah.
Here are my thoughts of your current situation.
Chat. Appearance. Size. Yeah, that's good enough. A bit of reading. Bit of reading. Yeah. If you read this, it's just wait, what? The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. Here's my dictionary. I'm supposed to read this with the microphone's in my face. You know what? I'm gonna try this. We're gonna try without the noise suppression, or with low at least. Yeah. Okay. Books are not absolutely dead things, but do not contain a potency of life in them to be as active as the soul with whose progeny they are. I need my chat a bit bigger. Why is it so tiny? Also, where's my glasses? Atsir? Hold up. What is this word? How do I pronounce this? Utkiare? Chapter 1. Utkiare. To lie awake before dawn, too worried to sleep. Twice upon a time, for that is how some stories should continue, there was a mother whose daughter was stolen from her. Oh, she could still see the girl. She could touch her skin and brush her hair. She could watch the slow rise and fall of her chest. And she placed her hand upon the child's breast. And if she placed her hand upon the child's breast, she could feel the beating of her heart. But the child was silent, and her eyes remained closed. Tubes helped her to breathe, and tubes kept her fed. But for the mother it was as though the essence of the one she loved was elsewhere, and the figure in the bed was a shell, a mannequin, waiting for disembodied soul to return and animate it. In the beginning, the mother believed that her daughter was still present, sleeping, and that by the sound of a beloved voice, telling stories and sharing news, she might be induced to wake. But as the days became weeks and the weeks became months, it grew harder and harder for the mother to keep faith in the imminence of her daughter. And so she grew to fear that everything that was her child, all that gave her meaning, her conversation, her laughter, even her crying, might never come back, and she would be left entirely bereft. The mother's name was Ceres, and her daughter was called Phoebe. Series. Wow. Alright, hold up, let me try that one again. The mother's name was Ceres, and her daughter was called Phoebe. There was also a man once, but not a father, because Ceres refused to dignify him with a word. He having left them to fend for themselves before the girl was even born. As far as Ceres was aware, he was living somewhere in Australia, and had never shown any desire to be part of his daughter's life. To be honest, Ceres was happy with the situation. She had not felt any lasting love for the man, and his disengagement suited her. She retained some small gratitude toward him for helping to create Phoebe, and on occasion she saw a little of him in her daughter's eyes and smile, but it was a fleeting thing, like a half-remembered figure glimpsed on the platform of its station at the train rolls by, sighted, then soon forgotten. Phoebe, too, had demonstrated only minimal curiosity about him, but with no accompanying wish to make contact, even though Ceres had always assured her that she could, if she wanted to. He was not on any social media, regarding it as the devil's work, but a few of his acquaintances used Facebook, and Ceres knew that they would get a message to him if required. Wait, hold up. Facebook? This ain't taking place in I don't know, the other one took place in like World War II or something. But that necessity had never arisen. Not until the accident. Ceres wanted to know what had happened, if only because the trauma was too much for her to bear alone, even as all attempts to share it failed to diminish it. Ultimately, she received only a curt acknowledgement via one of his associates, a single line informing her that he was sorry to hear about the mishap, and he hoped Phoebe would get better soon, as though that child was part of him were struggling with the flu or measles. Oh yeah, as though the child that was part of him were struggling with flu or measles, and not the aftermath of a catastrophic collision between a car and the delicate body of an 8-year-old girl. For the first time, Ceres hated Phoebe's father, hated him almost as much as the idiot who'd been texting while driving, and sending a message, not to his wife, but to his girlfriend, which made him both an idiot and a deceiver. He had visited the hospital a few days after the accident, forcing Ceres to request he be removed before he could talk to her. Since then, he tried to contact her both directly and through his lawyers, but she wanted nothing to do with him. She hadn't even wanted to sue him, not at first.
Praise the sun.
Although she'd been advised that she had to, if only to pay for her daughter's care, because who knew how long Phoebe might even endure this half-life, turned regularly by the nurses so that her poor skin would not develop bed sores. and surviving only with the aid of technology. Phoebe had banged her head on the ground after the impact, and so while the rest of her injuries were healing, something in her brain remained damaged, and no one could say when or if it might repair itself. A whole new vocabulary had presented itself to Ceres, an alien way of interpreting a person's continuance in the world. Cerebral edema, axonal injury, and most important of all to mother and child, the Glasgow Coma Scale, the metric of which Phoebe's consciousness and, by extension, possibly her right to a life, was now determined. Score less than 5 across eye, verbal, and motor response, and the chance of death or existing in a persistent vegetative state were 80%. Score more than 11, and the chances of recovery were estimated at 90%. However, like Phoebe, between those two figures and, well, Phoebe wasn't brain stem dead. That was the important thing. Her brain still flickered faintly and with activity. The doctors believed that Phoebe wasn't suffering, but who could say for sure? This was always spoken softly, and at the end, almost as an afterthought. Who can say for sure? We just don't know, you see. The brain, it's such a complex organism. We don't think there's any pain, but a conversation had taken place at the hospital during which it was suggested that, down the line, if Phoebe showed no signs of improvement, it might be a kindness to. This with a change of tone and a small sad smile let her go. Ceres looked for hope in her faces, but only sympathy. She did not want sympathy. She just wanted her daughter returned to her. October 29th. That was the first visit Ceres had missed. The first day she hadn't been with Phoebe since the accident. Ceres' body simply wouldn't lift itself from the chair in which she had sat to rest. It was too exhausted, too worn down, and she'd closed her eyes and gone to sleep again. Later, when she woke in that same chair in the dawn light, she felt such guilt that she wept. She checked her phone, certain that she had missed a message from the hospital informing her that, in her absence, no, because of her absence, Phoebe had passed away. Her radiance finally forever dimmed, but there was no message, and when Ceres called the hospital, she told that all... Wait, and when it was Ceres what? Oops. When Ceres called the hospital, she was told that all was as it had been, and probably as it would continue to be, stillness and silence. That was the beginning. Soon she was visiting the hospital only 5 days out of 7, sometimes even 4, and so it had remained ever since. Her sense of culpability became less immediate, although it continued to hover in the background, a gray shape, like a scepter. It haunted the shadows of the living room on those mornings and afternoons when she stayed at home, and sometimes she saw it reflected in the television screen as she turned off the set at night, a smear against the dark. The scepter had many faces. The scepter had many faces, occasionally even her own. After all, she was a mother who had brought a child into the world and then failed to protect her, letting Phoebe skip just a few steps ahead as they crossed Baum High Road. They were only feet from the curb, and the crossing was quiet. When Phoebe slipped her grip, it was an instant of inattention, but seconds later there was a blur and a dull thud, and then her daughter, as Ceres knew her, was gone. Left in her place was a changeling. Yet the presence that inhabited the dark was not a manifestation of guilt alone, but of something older and more implicable. It was death itself, or more correctly, herself, because it assumed a female aspect. On the worst nights at the hospital, as Ceres drifted into uneasy sleep beside her daughter, she could feel death hovering, seeking her chance. Death would have taken Phoebe on the high road, if only the child had landed a little more sharply on the ground. And now she remained tantalizingly out of reach. Ceres sensed Death's impatience and heard her voice. She, so close to kindness. When this becomes too much to bear, ask, and I will disencumber you both. And it was all Ceres could do not to give in. Damn. What the hell? Chapter 2. The deep, humid stillness before a storm breaks. Ceres arrived at the hospital at a little later than usual. A damp from the rain under her arm, she carried a book of fairy stories. One Phoebe had loved since she was young, but had never read herself. It was a book she associated only with being read out loud, and usually at night, so that all her affection for it and all of its power was tied up with the sound of her mother's voice. Even as she grew older, Phoebe still took pleasure in being read to by Ceres, but from this book alone, and not only when she was sad or anxious. The collection was battered at the edges and stained by fingerprints and spilled tea, but it was their book, a symbol of the bond between them. Ceres' father had told her that books retained traces of all those who read them, in the form of flakes of skin, hairs visible in minute, the oils from their fingertips, even blood and tears, so that just as a book became part of the reader, so too did a reader become part of the book. Each volume was a record of those who had opened its pages, an archive of the living and the dead. If Phoebe died, Ceres had decided that the book of fairy tales should be laid to rest with her. She could take it into the next world, and keep it close until her mother joined her. Because if Phoebe perished, Ceres knew that would not be long before she followed behind. Damn. She did not want to remain in a world in which her daughter was reduced to a memory. She thought this might also be the reason why she took no comfort from looking at videos of Phoebe on her phone or listening to recordings of her voice. These were relics, totems from the past, like a haunting, and Ceres did not wish for a Phoebe that was gone, but a Phoebe yet to be. A notice board beside the main entrance to the hospital reminded parents that a support group for those dealing with a sick child met every Wednesday night, with refreshments available after. Ceres had attended only once, sitting unspeaking while the others shared their pain. Some of the parents were much worse off than Ceres. She still had hope for Phoebe, but surrounding her that evening had been mothers and fathers whose children would never get better, with no prospect of surviving into adulthood. The experience had left Ceres feeling even more depressed and angry than usual. As a result, she had never gone back, and when she passed any parents from the group, she did her best not to catch their eyes. She recognized too that Phoebe's accident had resulted in a change in her own identity. She was no longer herself, but was now Phoebe's mother. It was the hospital staff frequently referred to her. Phoebe's mother is here. Phoebe's mother would like an update, and to the parents of the kids with whom Phoebe used to go to school. Ceres was not a person in her own right, but was defined solely in terms of her relationship to her suffering child. It seemed to accentuate Ceres' sense of dislocation and unreality, as though she could almost see herself fading away, just like her daughter. A nurse greeted her as she entered Phoebe's room, Stephanie, who had been there on that first night. Phoebe and Ceres, both covered in the same blood. Ceres knew nothing at all about Stephanie beyond her name, because she had never asked. Since the accident, Ceres' interest in the lives of those around her had largely fallen away. Stephanie pointed at the book. "The usual, I see," she said. "They never tire of them, do they?" Ceres felt a pricking at her eyes at this small kindness, the assumption that Phoebe, wherever she was, might be aware that these stories of her mother's continued attendance, and they might yet be capable of revitalizing her. "No, they never do," said Ceres, but she stopped herself. "Not to worry. It's not important." "It might be," said Stephanie. "If you change your mind, just let me know." But she didn't go about her duties. And Ceres knew that the nurse had further business with her. "Before you leave, Mr. Stewart would like a quick word," said Stephanie. "If you drop by the nurse's station when you have a moment, I'll take you to see him." Mr. Stewart was the principal physician responsible for Phoebe's care. He was patient and solicitous, but Ceres remained suspicious of him because of his relative youth. She did not believe he had lived long enough, or more correctly, suffered enough, to be able to deal properly with the suffering of others. And there was something in the nurse's face, something in her eyes, that told Ceres this conversation was not going to bring her any easement. She felt an end approaching. "I'll do that," said Ceres, while in her mind she pictured herself running from the hospital, her daughter gathered to her breast, the bedsheet like a shroud, only for it to be carried away. That was weird. I'll read that again. "I'll do that," said Ceres, while in her mind she pictured herself running from the hospital, her daughter gathered to her breast, the bedsheet like a shroud, only for it to be carried away by the wind, floating high into the air like a departing ghost, leaving her to discover that her arms were empty. "If I'm not there, just ask them to page me," said Stephanie. And there it was again, this time in the nurse's smile, a sadness, a regret. "This is a nightmare," Ceres thought, "a living one, and only death will bring it to a close." Huh. Hold up. Dang, why is it so depressing? I need my notebook. Need my other notebook. Dude, why is it so depressing all of a sudden? Like right now. Okay. Let's continue. I need a bookmark, huh? These can come off easily, right? Huh. Because I straight up lost where I was. Here we go, chapter 3. Where was I? Chapter 3. The Darkness of a Rook's Feathers. Ceres read to Phoebe for an hour, but had anyone asked her the substance of the stories, she would have been able to tell them. She would have been unable to tell them, so distracted was she. Finally, she set the book aside and brushed her daughter's hair. Working so gently at the tangles at Phoebe's head remained undisturbed on the pillow. Phoebe's eyes were closed. They were always closed now. Ceres saw only a suggestion of the blue of them when Mr. Stewart or one of his juniors came by to lift the eyelids and check Phoebe's pupillary responses, like pale clouds briefly parting to reveal a glimpse of sky. She set aside the hairbrush and rubbed moisturizer into Phoebe's hands. Peach assented, because Phoebe liked the smell of peaches. Before straightening her nightgown and rubbing tiny flecks of sleep from the corners of her shuttered lenses. When these small services were complete, Ceres took Phoebe's right hand and kissed the tip of each finger. Return to me, she whispered, because I miss you so. She heard a noise at the window and looked up to see a bird staring at her through the glass. It was missing its left eye, the injury marked by twin scars. It tilted its head, croaked once, and then was gone. Was that a crow? She turned. Stephanie was standing in the doorway. Ceres wondered how long she had been there waiting. No, said Ceres. A rook. They used to hunt battlefields. Why? Asked Stephanie. To feed on the dead. The words were out of Ceres' mouth before she could block them. Scavenger. Carrion seeker. Omen. The nurse stared at her, uncertain how to respond. Well, she said at last. You'll find no pickings here. No, agreed Ceres. Not here. Not today. How do you know such things? Said Stephanie. About rooks and the like, I mean. My father taught them to me when I was younger. That's an odd lesson to be teaching a child. Ceres placed Phoebe's hand on the bedspread and stood. Not for him. He was a university librarian and an amateur folklorist. You could talk about giants, witches, and worms until your eyes glazed over. Stephanie gestured once again at the book under Ceres' arm. Is that where you and Phoebe got your love for fairy stories? Fairy stories? Fairy stories sounds so weird to say. My own boy devours them. I think we may even have a copy of that same book, or one very like it. Ceres almost laughed. This? My father would have hated to see me reading Phoebe such nonsense. And why would that be? Ceres thought of the old man, dead now for these 5 years. Phoebe had been permitted to know him, only briefly, and he her. Because, she said, they just aren't dark enough. What? Okay. Did her father prefer frickin' dark things? The consultant didn't have an office of his own in the main hospital, but worked from a private room in an adjoining building. Stephanie escorted Ceres to his door, even though she knew the way. It made her feel like a prisoner being led to the gallows. The room was anonymous apart from a piece of abstract art on the wall behind the desk. There were no pictures of Mr. Stewart's family, though she knew he was married with children. Ceres always found it odd that doctors, once they attained a certain level of expertise, became plain old misters once again. If she had spent years training to be a doctor, the last thing she would have wanted was to forego the title she had worked so hard to obtain. She'd probably have had it branded on her forehead. She took a seat across from Mr. Stewart, and they all made small talk. The weather, an apology for the smell of fresh paint, the decorators having just been in, but neither of them had their heart in it, and gradually it dwindled to nothing. Just say whatever you have to say, Ceres told him. It's the waiting that kills us. She spoke as mildly as she could, but it still emerged sounding harsher than she might have wished. We think that Phoebe requires a different level of care from now on, said Mr. Stewart, supportive rather than curative. Her condition hasn't altered, which is good in a way, although it may have not seemed so at first glance. It hasn't worsened, in other words, and we believe she's as comfortable as she's likely to be for a while. But that's all you can do for her? Said Ceres, making her comfortable. Wait, said Ceres. Make her comfortable? I mean, not make her better? Yes, that's all we can do for now. Which is not to say that Down the line, this won't change, whether through developments in treatments or Phoebe's own capacity for recovery. She looked strained, and Ceres thought she understood why he didn't keep pictures of his wife. Oh my god. He looked strained, and Ceres thought she understood why he didn't keep pictures of his wife and kids on his desk. Who could tell how many such conversations he was forced to endure every day, with parents hearing the worst news about their children. Rhymes, how are you doing? Hope you're having a wonderful morning, afternoon? How cute, cozy. Yeah, we're reading The Land of Lost Things. It is a sequel to a book I love called The Book of Lost Things, written by John Connolly. This came out like a couple of years later, and I was like, whoa, he made a sequel? Kinda. Not really a sequel, but like a second book. But yeah, hope you're doing well. Because last time we were reading, we read Scarlet Study, A Study in Scarlet, and we read Call of Cthulhu. Yes. Where was I? I'm gonna read from the beginning again. He looked strained, and Ceres thought she understood why he didn't keep pictures of his wife and kids on his desk. Who could tell how many such conversations he was forced to endure every day, with parents hearing the worst news about their children. For some, being required to look at pictures of another man's healthy family while they tried to come in terms with their own grief would only add to their burden. Not Ceres, though. She hoped only that each day when he went home, Mr. Stewart hugged his children to give him and gave thanks for what he had given. She was glad that he had his family, and she wished only happiness. The world had enough misery to be getting along with.
Welcome to the reading stream.
Oh, did that break?
Come and listen while Zaya reads through various books aloud.
That's weird. Okay. Right now, the mother named Ceres has a daughter hospitalized due to a car accident, and I think it's been a long time she's been in this vegetative state, if anything. So she kind of goes, shows up with fairy tale stories to read to her. It's the first book was freaking depressed. Like, it starts depressing at the beginning, but it gets dark. Like the first book, don't apologize. It's all good. The first book was like, it was dark fantasy. It was definitely something I did not expect. Coming from a dude who's known for making a mystery horror series. And right now she's talking to one of the physicians about the current state of her daughter. That's all we can do for now, which is not to say down the line this won't change, either through the developments in treatment or in Phoebe's own capacity for recovery. And what are the chances of that? She said. There's limited brain activity, said Mr. Stewart, but there is activity. We have to hope. Ceres began to cry. She hated herself for doing it. Even though it wasn't the first time she cried in front of this man, yes, she continued to hope, but it was hard, and she was so weary. Mr. Stewart said nothing, but gave her time to recover herself. How was work? What? How was work? He asked. Non-existent. Ceres did freelance copywriting, which had expanded into... That's an interesting way to... They start a conversation with the weather and the paint and stuff on the wall. Then all of a sudden, let me just talk about your daughter. And we may have to change some ways of how we're treating her. Anyway, how's work? Ceres did freelance copywriting, which had expanded into copy editing. But that was all past tense. She hadn't been able to concentrate since the accident, and so hadn't been able to work, which meant she wasn't bringing in any money. She had already spent most of her savings. Not that she'd ever had much. Not as a single mother living in London, and really didn't know how she could continue. It was one of the reasons why she'd agreed to sue the driver, but he and his lawyers were resisting the payment of even a modest interim sum for fear that it might leave them open to greater liability down the line. The whole mess would have kept her awake at night if she wasn't so exhausted all the time. I don't wish to pry, said Mr. Stewart. Pry away. I don't have a great deal left to hide. How badly are you struggling? Pretty badly. In every way, including financially. I may be mistaken, said Mr. Stewart, but didn't you tell me that your family owned a property in Buckinghamshire? I'm not gonna do a freaking British accent. I'll try if I accidentally do it, but I'm not gonna do it. Yes, said Ceres, a small cottage not too far from Olney? It was my childhood home. My mother still uses it during the summer, and Phoebe and I spend the occasional weekend there. Her mother had often suggested to Ceres that she move to the cottage permanently instead of wasting money on rent in London, but Ceres hadn't wanted to return. Going back to where she began would have felt like an admission of failure on her part, and there had been Phoebe's school and circle of friends to consider as well. Now those things are no longer an issue. Why? There is a care facility, a very good one, exclusively for young people, on the outskirts of Bletchley, with a considerable degree of specialization in brain injury. It's called the Lantern House, and a space has just opened up. My parents live in Milton Keynes? So I'm back and forth quite a bit and have a professional relationship with the Lantern. My suggestion, if you were amenable, would be to transfer Phoebe there as soon as practical. She'll be well looked after. I'll be kept in the loop, and its status as a registered charity means that you won't have the financial concern hanging over your head. Not to the same degree, at least. Given the circumstances, the Lantern might be the best option for everyone. But we're not giving up on Phoebe. You have to understand that. She nodded, but didn't mean it. They were giving up on Phoebe here, or so it seemed to Ceres, and the word charity stung, because she had always paid her own way. Now it was what she and Phoebe were reduced to. She felt powerless, useless. Let's move her then, she said, and so it was done. The evening had turned cold, November and winter in the ascendant. Already barely minutes after ending her conversation with Mr. Stewart, Ceres was making plans to reorder her life. She wouldn't particularly miss London, not any longer. She still consciously avoided the road on which Phoebe had been hit, and the pall cast by the accident seemed to have spread from the small stretch of tarmac to all of South London and, by extension, the rest of the city. Whatever her reservations about Buckinghamshire, moving back there would help her escape one shadow, and a change of environment might even enable her to get back to work again. The Winter King on his throne, and all change in the realm. Why does each chapter have like Old English as the names? Do they want me to look it up? What the heck does Anhaga mean? One who dwells alone. Off the lonely one prays for himself. Okay. Hold up. Let me grab my... I need a... I really need a, whatchamacallit? Bookmark one day. Where's my notebook? Chapter 3. Series talked with Mr. Stewart. Recommended Phoebe to go to the ledger for different treatment, charity. Series is a copy editor. Chapter 4. The One Who Dwells Alone. I need water. The move took about 3 weeks, all told. Preparations had been made for Phoebe's arrival at the Lantern House, and the cottage needed to be made ready for the longer-term habitation. Ceres' landlord in London was sorry to see her go. She was a good tenant, which meant she didn't kick up a fuss or cost him a lot in repairs. But any sorrow he felt at her departure was eased by the knowledge that he could now test the market by raising the rent. Well, that's nice. They didn't raise the rent while she was there. I guess it makes sense. I feel like you'd be a pretty dick move to raise the rent while someone's child is dying. Ceres' friends, of whom she had just a handful, Ceres' friends, of whom she had just a handful, London being a hard place to make enduring friendships, especially for someone who worked alone, held a farewell drinks party for her. But it was a low-key affair, and she knew that only a few of them would keep their promises to visit. They had done their best to be considerate toward her, but people only have so much time, attention, and care to give, and the torments and sorrows of others can be draining, even for the most generous among us. God damn it. Goddamn, my brain. I can't believe my brain just went straight to Among Us. They had done their best to be considerate toward her, but people only have so much time, attention, and care to give, and the only torment and sorrows of others can be draining, even for the most generous among us. So fucking silly. All right, back to it. Ceres was aware that the knowledge of her daughter's condition altered the mood of any company of which she was part of. Well, I did not pay attention to any of that. Hold up. Ceres was aware that the knowledge of her daughter's condition altered the mood of any company of which she was a part. Sometimes she knew dinner parties or restaurant outings to which she might previously have been invited went ahead quietly without her being aware of them. But she felt no resentment toward those involved. After all, there had been occasions since the accident when, among close acquaintances and fueled by a glass of wine or two, she had laughed out loud at a joke or story and felt immediately remorseful. The effect as sobering as a slap across the face. Was it permissible to laugh when one's child was suspended somewhere between living and dying? When a day might come requiring a decision that would bring an... Hold up. After all, there had been occasions since the accident when, among close acquaintances, and fueled by a glass or two of wine, she had laughed aloud at a joke or story and felt immediately remorseful. The effect as sobering as a slap across the face. Was it permissible to laugh when one's child was suspended somewhere between living and dying? When a day might come requiring a decision that would bring an end to her span on earth because of that most nebulous of concepts, quality of life. And what, Ceres thought, if something were to happen to herself? What if she became ill or died? Who then would make decisions about Phoebe? She supposed it would have to be a professional. She could not ask this of one of her friends, and even her mother might be reluctant to accept sole responsibility, especially as she was now in her early 70s. Ceres had been advised by the medical staff to set out her wishes in a will, but so far had resisted. No parent should be forced to make plans for the possibility of their child's death by the withdrawal of medical care. It seemed impossible to think of such a thing and remain sane. How could she place such a burden on someone close to her? Dude. Then there were lawyers interviewing witnesses, corroborating Ceres' version of events, collecting photographs, maps, diagrams. Every week brought another letter, more questions, progress toward a hearing, a settlement. Her life had become inseparable to her daughter's, so she was not even sure that she knew herself anymore. The passage of time had lost its meaning, and whole days would go by without any sense of purpose or achievement. She existed, but, like Phoebe, she did not truly live. On the day that Phoebe was transferred to the Lantern House, Ceres tagged after the ambulance in her car, the last of her possessions on the seats. She could have traveled with her daughter, who was hooked up to a portable ventilator on the journey, but she chose not to. She could not have said why, except that, where possible, she now preferred to be alone rather than be forced to make conversation, especially in a vehicle containing her comatose child. Strangers who knew nothing of her predicament were easier to deal with, easier even than some friends. As she drove, she saw that the grass had still not fully recovered from the summer drought, when the land had been rendered a parched, dull yellow instead of the lusher green of her childhood. It seemed to get worse each year, but then so did many things. The Lantern House was very modern, set on well-tended grounds, surrounded by woodland, and concealed it from the road. Every room, she was told, was situated so that it looked out on the grass, trees, and blooms. Every room, she was told, was situated so that it looked out on the grass, trees, and blooms, summer flowering plants having been replaced for the season with snowdrops, Christmas roses, Mahonia, Daphne, winter jasmine, and clematis. Phoebe's accommodation, once she was settled in, smelled faintly of whenever it's a freaking dash in between a word, it's just like, come on. I know, yeah, save paper and all, but Phoebe's accommodation, once she was settled in, smelled faintly of honeysuckle, and through the window, Ceres could see the cream-white flowers amid branches that were otherwise close to bare. A pair of winter-active bumblebees was fitting the blossoms to blossom, and the sight of them brought reassurance. Phoebe loved bumblebees. The speed and grace of creatures both small and yet also, in their way, nearly impossibly large. But how do they fly? Phoebe would ask. Their wings are so little. Their wings are so little, and their bodies so big. I don't know, but they do. When I grow up, I want to be a bumblebee. Really? Only for a day, just to see what it's like. Add that to the list, which included variously kingfishers, worms, whales, dolphins, giraffes, elephants, elephants both African and Indian, assorted breeds of small dog, butterflies, but not moths, blackbirds, meerkats, and just to be gross, dung beetles. Just to be gross, dung beetles? Base daughter. It was an actual list too, kept in an envelope pinned to the kitchen corkboard. Plans for a life, halted indefinitely. Bruh. What is this? Why this is book? A voice spoke Ceres' name. I'm sorry, she said. I was elsewhere. The staff member was big and tall, with a soft, indefinable accent. His name, he had informed Ceres upon arrival, was Oliver. Like most of the staff at the Lantern House and the hospital in London, he came from somewhere distant from England. In his case, Mozambique? All these people, Ceres reflected, far from home, cleaning, tending, consoling the children of others, often doing jobs that no one born here wanted to do. Oliver had been speaking to Phoebe since she was taken from the ambulance, explained to her where she was going, and what was happening as they moved her from the stretcher to the bed. He did not treat her anything but He did not treat her anything. He did not treat her as anything but a sentient child who heard and understood everything she was being told. And his gentleness was striking for such a big man, because Oliver stood at least a foot taller than Ceres, and she was 5'7". Huh. 5'7"? I was just saying that we've made Phoebe comfortable, said Oliver, and you can stay as long as you like with her. You can also visit when you please, or near enough to it. That sofa folds out to a bed if you want to spend the night beside her, although we also keep a couple of suites ready for parents. We ask only that you don't arrive after 9. Wait, what? We ask only that you don't arrive after 9 in the evening, unless it's an emergency, just to avoid disturbing any of the other children who may be settling down to sleep. I understand, and thank you for being so good to Phoebe. Oliver looked genuinely puzzled, as though it would have never occurred to him to behave other than as he did, and Ceres knew that her daughter had found her way to the right place. Well, said Oliver, I'll leave you two alone. I'll drop by later. Oh, my bad. Well, said Oliver, I'll leave you two alone. I'll drop by later. Phoebe, make sure you're okay. He patted her hand before leaving. You're being guarded by a giant, Ceres informed Phoebe. No one will dare harm you while he's around. But she looked to the shadows as she spoke. The sun was setting, and soon it would be dark. Although she was wearied by the day, Ceres took the book of fairy stories from her bag and began reading to her unresponsive child. The Tale of the Two Dancers. Oh, hold up. Does this count as the next chapter? What would you even call this? Probably not. It's all part of one. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I might as well. I'm gonna write down my notebook. Wait, what the heck? I lost it. Where'd it go? The Tale of the Two Dancers. Once upon a time near the town. I just got a message. No. That was weird. Once upon a time near the town of how do I pronounce this word, this name, this place? Yeah, okay. Once upon a time near the town of Aachen is what is now Alright. The Tale of the Two Dancers. Once upon a time near the town of Aachen, in what is now modern Germany, there lived a young woman named Agathe. Agathe? Yeah, alright. Agathe. There lived a young woman named Agathe. As this name was common in the region, she was known as Agathe de Sonnenlicht, or Agathe of the sunlight, because of her hair was as golden as the rays of the sun. And like the sun, Agatha was bright and beautiful, with a pure heart. She took care of her widowed mother and her two younger siblings, and worked their little patch of land with the aid of her brother and sister. So mindful was she of her family that she refused to marry, since she did not trust any husband to be as loving and tender toward them as she was. And truth be told, since the family was not very wealthy and could provide no dowry for her, Agatha did not have as many suitors as other women less pretty and kind than she. I'm not a fan of this font. I know it's to show that it's another story, but reading out loud, I'm just stumbling everything. She was also a good judge of character, having learned well at the feet of her mother, who had learned from her mother, who had learned from hers, and so Agatha was the inheritor of generations of female knowledge, which, as any wise person will tell you, is very useful knowledge to possess. Agatha could look into a man's eyes and peer straight into his heart, although she spoke of what she saw only with her mother, for she did not care to arouse hostility or risk being branded a witch for what she was. After all, most common sense and perspicacity? What? Perspicacity? The ability to understand things quickly and make accurate judgments. I'm writing that one down. Oh, shoot. See, I think what's great about the notebook is I'm probably the only one that can understand my own chicken writing. Perspicacity. The ability to understand things quickly and make accurate judgments. Huh. Interesting. Okay, back to the story. Agatha could look into a man's eyes and peer straight through to his heart, although she spoke of what she saw only with her mother, for she did not care to arouse hostility or risk being branded a witch for what she was. A witch for what was, after all, mostly common sense and perspicacity. If Agatha had one love, her family apart, it was dancing. When alone, she would find her feet following the patterns of a pavane or quadrille, tracing the movements on a dirt floor or a grassy field as she went, and leaving the evidence behind in the form of her footprints. On feast days, she would be the first to rise when the music began to play, and the last to sit when it ended. So graceful she was, so lithe. So grateful she was, so grateful was she, so lithe, so attuned to the rhythms of the players, that she could elevate even the clumsiest of partners, as though her gifts were so abundant that they overflowed her to spill into others. This was the cause of occasional envy among some of the less accomplished girls in the village, and even some of the more accomplished ones. But Agatha's disposition was so gentle, and she was so generous in spirit that she could remain resentful for long. Few, though, is not all. On the other side of the hill from Agatha's family lived a girl named Osana. Osana? Who was almost as beautiful as Agatha, almost as clever, almost as graceful, and for whom these shortfalls were like dagger thrusts to the heart. Sometimes she would watch from the woods as Agatha danced, willing her to stumble, wishing her to fall, the misstep to be punctuated by a cry of pain and the crack of a bone breaking. But Agatha was too sure-footed, and only in Osana's dreams did her rival falter. Yet so fierce was Osana's jealousy, so poisonous her rancor, that it began to transform her very being until her thoughts. That it began to transform her very being until all her thoughts, both sleeping and waking, were of Agatha. But we must be careful of our fancies and wary of our dreams, lest the worst of them should be heard or witnessed, and something should choose to act upon them. It was the custom in the place that it was the custom in that place to hold a special dance on Carnival's Day. Oh god. Oh my god. Car Neville's Dine. Neville's Dine. Oh, okay. It was the custom in that place to hold a special dance on Carnivalstag or Shrove Tuesday, a final opportunity for feasting and merriment before the commencement of the Lenten fast. As the time of the festival approached, Agatha danced away the days and lost herself in music only she could hear. On the morning before it, she was so distracted as she danced through the fresh fields that she failed to notice another set of footprints materializing alongside her own, as though her movements were being shadowed by some unseen other, an invincible dancer as skilled as she, one who had no difficulty in matching her steps, and when she hummed a tune, as she did from time to time, a second voice echoed hers, but so low as to be mistaken for the buzzing of insects, or so high to be disturbed only by the birds in the trees who fled from the sound of it. That night, Agatha slept. A shape watched her from the window, and it eclipsed the very darkness. So Carnival's Day instead came, and as usual, Agatha was the first to her feet when musicians began to play, dancing with all who asked, young or old, awkward or expert. Even had she not been so adept, it would not have been in her to refuse anyone for fear she might hurt their feelings, or expose them to ridicule from their peers. She did not stumble, did not tire. The torches were lit, and the celebrations became louder and more raucous. Oh. Ugh. Sit up. Okay, where were we? The torches were lit, and celebrations became louder and more. Right, I was looking up how to spell. Raucous? Raucous? Raucous. Oh. The torches were lit and the celebrations became louder and more raucous. Raucous? And still Agath danced, until no man in the town who was capable of it had not moved in to step with her. Finally, as the cloud passed across the moon, although the night was clear and the torches flickered briefly, although no wind blew, a stranger moved through the crowd, the celebrants making way for him even before they became aware of his presence, because an old fearful part of them, one deeper than sight or hearing, had sensed his coming and sought to protect them from it. And he had not touched them, not even touched him. He was tall and handsome, his hair dark, his teeth white, and even his skin unmarked, his eyes merciless. His clothes was black and without decoration, was finely made, and his leather boots shone as though worn for the first time. And while no one could recall ever having seen him, while no one could recall ever having seen him in that place before, he appeared to them as almost unrecognizable, and to Asana more than the rest. She knew him because she had glimpsed him in her dreams. At last, the stranger stood before her and extended a hand. "Dance with me," he said. Agath looked deep into his eyes and perceived him for what he was. What was tall without was short within. What was beautiful was blighted. What was sweet was sour, and what was straight was crooked. So very crooked. "I'll not dance with you," she said. "You have danced with me before." Only then did Agath register the imprints of footsteps in the grass, the buzzing of insects where none flew, the fleeing of birds where no threat was to be found, and saw how careless she had been. "If I did," she said, "it was not by my own will, and that was no dance at all. I wanted to be certain that you were a worthy partner. Was that so wrong?" "I find it so," said Agath. His wintry eyes, cold gray, grew chillier still. "I will ask you again," said the stranger. "Dance with me." "And for the second time," said Agath, "I will tell you I will not dance with you." The stranger's teeth nipped at the night air, and Agath saw that they were now close to yellow, like the flesh of an apple discoloring. "You have danced with all the rest," he said, "so why will you not oblige me?" "Because you are not what you pretend to be." His outstretched arms took in the gathering, because all were quiet now, and even the musicians had ceased to play. "Is anyone," he said, You are prideful, and that, as your priest will tell you, is the original of your gravest of sins. Though you are not alone in sinning, this one," a finger pointed at Uwe the baker, soaks old bread in water and add to his dough, and thus adulterates the mix. The finger shifted an inch. This one, Axel the blacksmith, cheats on his wife with a woman in the next village. This one is a thief. This one dilutes his beer. And this one, the finger found Osana, summoned me here out of envy of you. Osana looked appalled. She was not a bad person, although there was badness in her. Now, confronted by true evil and apprehending the part she might have played in its arrival, she was both fearful and contrite. But too late. Her response rendered less sincere by coming only as a consequence of being found out. "Stop," said Agatha. "This is not kind." "So many you have danced with," said the stranger, "and each are not what they pretend to be." "They are all flawed," said Agatha, as am I. "But our flaws are not the sum of us. That is not true of you. There is no good in you, no good at all." The stranger's body spasmed, and everyone gathered there heard the snapping and popping of bone and cartilage. Afterward, he did not stand so straight or so tall. His lesions had opened his face. What? Lesions? Opened on his face. From the deepest of them, a millipede crawled, only to hide itself in his hair. "I'll ask you one last time," he said to Agath. "Dance with me." "And I will tell you for the last time," said Agath, "that I will not dance with you." With that, the stranger's disguise fell away entirely, revealing a crooked man. I don't like the way this is going, considering from the first book about the crooked man. No, thought Agath, not a crooked man, but the crooked man. It was his name and his essence, every badness made manifest. This she knew, although she could have said how, having never set eyes on him until that night. "Then let the dance go on without me," said the crooked man, "but you will play no further part in it, and for that you may come to thank me." His right hand made a sign in the air, and a serpentine dagger materialized in his fist. Suddenly he was no longer in front of Agath, but behind her, and with a single slash, he severed the tendons in her lower legs. Agath, oh shoot, dude, I forgot how dark this book was. I was about to say game. I forgot how dark this. Okay. Suddenly he was no longer in front of Agath, but behind her, and with a single slash, he severed the tendons in her lower legs. Agath collapsed instantly, but none came to aid her. None could, because each had begun to dance, all except the musicians, who commenced a tune that had never heard before, and never learned, slowly at first, then faster and faster, and the music quickened. And as the music quickened, so too did the steps of the dancers. And though they tried to stop themselves, they could not. The dancing continued for hours, and hours, then days, and days. It was only ceased when the dancers became so exhausted that even the crooked man's spell could not compel them to continue, or their limbs snapped and they dropped to the ground. And when the spell had depleted itself, and the revels were ended, only one villager could not be found, Osana, who had brought the crooked man down upon them by her ill will toward Agath. Uwe, the baker, thought he had seen the crooked man take her by the hand and drag her away toward the woods. And so a search began. led by the hounds, and then a week had gone by, but the dogs managed to pick up Asana's scent, and they traced it to the heart of the forest. There they found Asana's body, her feet worn to stumps as she danced herself to death. And that is the tale of the two dancers. Bro. You kidding me right now? Where's my notebook? So her envy created the crooked man, or Zaya the crooked man. What the okay. Story 1. Two dancers. I guess. Kind. Sweet. Dancer. Asana. Envy. God damn it. Envy. Hate. Towards. I guess. Dreams of hate. During Shrove Tuesday. Sana danced. Wait, hold up. I think I got confused between the two. Oh! I see. Whoa, okay. Jesus. That's what happens when you wish the worst upon someone. Jesus Christ. So Agath was sweet and kind dancer. Osana was also a dancer, but she envied and hated Agath. Agath dreamed. She dream of a I'll dance with you. Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna get nightmares. Well, let's say the worst. To her. Tuesday. Danced. I guess. Refused to dance. With a stranger. For he was not what he seemed. Revealing everyone's flaws. Including Osana's. She manifested him from her envy. Keep spelling envy wrong. Envy. Man. Pissed. I guess he kind of cuts off her legs. And forces everyone to continue dancing. Takes Asana into forest and makes her dance to death. The end. What the hell? just going to continue until the end of this chapter. What an unusual story. I don't think I've ever heard of it before. Oliver was standing in the doorway. Siri did not know how long he had been there. Long enough at least, to have listened to some, if not all, of the tale. But here was the thing. Sirius had never heard that story before either. It was not contained in the book, balanced on her knees. She had not been reading but reciting it as if from memory. She had not been reading but reciting as if from memory. She had no earlier remembrance of the tale, just as she could not recall having held a pen in her hand when she began. Stranger still, upon looking down at the book, she discovered she had been writing the story as she told it, but set at an angle to the existing text on the page, so that by slightly adjusting position of the book, one or the other might be read. The palimpsest were near enough to one that was what it was called. Her father, whose work had included deciphering old manuscripts, loved encountering them, artifacts from a past when paper was too precious to be used only once. At an angle, I see. Oliver was now by Siri's side. He too had spotted her handwriting on the pages, 5 of which had been filled with a story. "I didn't know you were a writer," he said. "I'm not," said Sirius. "Or not like this. Of stories, I mean. I don't know where that even came from. I must have heard it somewhere, or read it as a child." "Once upon a time," said Oliver. "Or there was and there was not, as my grandmother used to begin them." "Yes, I suppose so. Once upon a time. Or there was and there was not. There was and there was not a girl. There was and there was not her mother." But the idea she had somehow birthed a story was confusing to Ceres. As a young woman, she had enjoyed drawing, but stopped in late adolescence, when she grasped that all she was doing was trying to reduce the world. When she grasped that all she was doing was trying to reproduce the world. Real artists, by contrast, rendered the world anew, which was beyond her abilities. She had knowledge, but what she had lacked, she decided was imagination. Now, perhaps that capacity, a comfort with not knowing which brought forth invention, might have been hers after all, but in a different form, words, not pictures. Ceres stood. It was time for her to leave. She kissed Phoebe goodbye. "She looks so small," said Ceres, not to Oliver, but to some unseen other, because there was a hint of reproach to her voice. She had grown more and more used to speaking aloud her thoughts, especially when she was alone with Phoebe. It was a way to break the hush and let her daughter know she was near. Phoebe never reacted, but that was no reason for Ceres to stop. The day she did, there was no longer be a point to anything. There would be no longer a point to anything. Each week that goes by, she grows thinner. I can see it in her face. This is how we sometimes lose people. Not at all at once, but little by little, like the wind blowing specks of pollen from a flower. "I've seen her medical records," said Oliver. "Your daughter is a fighter. If anyone can pull through, she can." "You're very kind," said Ceres. It was a rote response. She'd grown good at giving rote responses. Learning something in order to be able to repeat. Oh, the process of learning something by repetition rather than by really understanding it. Okay, I get it. I kinda like that word. Hold up. Rote. Process of learning by learning something by repetition rather than by really understanding it. You're very kind, said Ceres, with a row response. She'd grown good at giving row responses, but Oliver, it appeared, was not one of them. It doesn't mean anything if it isn't true, he said, and I won't ever lie to you or to Phoebe. Ceres did not reply. Lies or truths, they made no difference now. I don't think I can keep doing this, she whispered. I don't have the strength. And somewhere a woman heard. I drew and drew nearer. Oh, with a dark story already. That's wild. Alright. Interesting story. I wonder what it has to do with. Usually every story in like the first book kind of represents what's happening in the real world. In a way. So this girl, Asana, being jealous and having envy towards Agath led to her death and everyone's fate. I don't think it's trying to say that. Who's our protagonist? I don't think it's trying to say that Ceres is jealous of parents who still have their children, right? In a way. Or maybe it is. Maybe she was like that. I don't know. Anyway. Let's lower the volume. We're gonna end it for tonight. Thanks for stopping by, tuning in. I can't believe I spilled water all over. Tomorrow or today, 1 p.m. EST, we are going to be doing some. We're gonna read, and then there were none. So that's gonna be a good one. That's when I want to like read. But man, and I'm already pretty freaking invested in this. Maybe I'll continue Land of Lost Things. Who knows? It's interesting. It's definitely interesting so far. Compared to the first book. I'm looking at the cover art and it's just like, what does it all mean? If I look at the cover art for the first book, it's like, I see, there's the crooked man and the keys. And who's the protagonist? David? Reading books. And here's a lot more. It's like an hourglass looking thing. Crossbow. I'm assuming that's... Anyway, have a good night. We'll be back later. And then there were none. That's one I do want to read. But I'm gonna continue Land of Lost Things. Just like, whenever I just feel like reading something without having too much, I don't know how to say it. Emotion? No. Loudness? Yeah. I like this just whispery voice. Have a good night. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.